Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I declare the extraordinary council meeting CL24 Bar 2 open and welcome everyone here. So I'll open the karakia. Whakatau mai te wairua. Whakawātea mai te hinanaro. Whakarite mai te tinana. Kia ea ai ngā mahi. Ai. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and the consequences of that. I have an apology from Councillor Sol. Could I ask for a mover and seconder for that, please? Councillor Henry, Councillor Granger. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. There are no late items. Does anyone have a declaration of interest? No, thank you. There are no public excluded items, and I'm not aware of anyone for a public forum. So we move on to the key item of the day, item 9.1 on page 7 onwards. So this follows from our council meeting on the 22nd of February, where we moved to let the matter lie on the table. I'm going to ask Natalie to introduce this. I did want to just signal that in this situation, given the complexity and the questions that have been around, I'm wanting to have a fairly informal discussion to answer any further questions and an opportunity for everyone to corridor around that. Councillor Murray-Bange.
So I would move, sir, that standing orders be suspended.
I would be hesitant to do that. I'm willing to just have a good conversation so we can get the wording right and everyone's comfortable. I don't think we need to suspend standing orders.
Questions? Are you allowing us to ask questions?
Absolutely. Yes. I think we're on the same page. It's just I don't think we need to suspend standing orders for that. Okay.
With your assurance, sir, I'm satisfied.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So with that, I'll ask Natalie to introduce this report. Thank you.
Good afternoon. If I could please have the report taken as read and make the following comments. What is in front of you is the report containing the recommendations received from Council's Independent Hearings Panel for Plan Change 92 and the Notice of Requirement for a Mokoroa Active Reserve. The panel's recommendations were brought to the 22nd of February Council meeting for decisions. It was staff's recommendation at that meeting that the panel's recommendations be accepted. However, upon receiving the comments and noting the concern raised at the meeting, it was Council's decision to have that lie on the table. Staff have since provided further detail and analysis to address the concerns raised and taken advice on alternatives to accepting the recommendations, and in particular the implications and risks associated with rejecting the panel's decisions outright or in part. On Friday, 1st of March last week, a workshop was held with elected members, the notes of which are attached to this updated report that you're considering today. At this workshop, staff worked through the issues raised and the risks of Council's current and future position should the plan change be rejected, or should the plan change be accepted only over greenfield portions of both the Mokoroa and Te Puke. Staff provided advice confirming that the Council's risk of not accepting the plan change or seeking to only apply the plan change over portions would present considerable risks to Council. With that information in hand, the workshop concluded in providing direction to staff on those recommendations from the panel that Council were not in agreement with. These are the recommendations the panel has made with respect to provisions for vibration standards, for reverting a portion of Francis Road back to future urban zoning, and a portion of land, the Brunning land, which is proposed as natural open space, reverting that back to future urban zoning. The report has sought to reflect the views and the direction provided. We recommend the plan change recommendations made by the panel be accepted, except for the provisions set out in Table 1 relating to those matters. Table 1 also includes alternatives and reasons for those decisions to reject the recommendations, and these are the matters that will pass to the Minister for a decision. The remainder of the accepted recommendations will become legal and operative within the district plan, subject to the decisions made today. The report includes an additional recommendation that would allow council staff to address any minor editing or consequential changes to rules required to fully reflect the recommendations council may wish to reject. We've sought to identify those consequential changes in the table, but there may still be a provision which needs to be adjusted accordingly, and this recommendation has been added to provide a practical means to address that. With respect to the notice of requirement for the Omokoroa Active Reserve, the recommendation to accept the panel's position, which is to confirm the notice of requirement with modified conditions, remains unchanged. As it was signalled on the 22nd of February, these plan-making processes, particularly Plan Change 92, remain a critical step in unlocking urban land to enable greater housing supply in our district. While government continues to set its own direction on addressing the housing crisis, and just last week provided more detail on its new Going for Housing growth policy, the legal requirements to deliver on this plan change remain in place. In fact, government has signalled MDRS will continue to be a housing option for councils in the future. Conversely, it may be an option councils can move away from, but government signalling ahead of having an actual policy in place indicates that will only happen where that council is able to demonstrate it has at least 30 years development capacity for housing available. And at this point, this council doesn't. As it stands, the plan change and notice of requirement have been through a thorough legislative process with public involvement. And we hope that you feel assured that the commissioners for this process are experienced and qualified across a range of relevant components of this plan change. The hearing ran for a week. There was a lot of information to cover in that time. But for the most part, the commissioners have upheld staff's advice across the majority of their recommendations, many of which have been subject to negotiation between different submitters. There has been a considerable investment to date in progressing this work, which is both complex in its nature and its process. Not only does this plan change rezone existing residentially zoned land for medium density scale development, but it provides for the rezoning of greenfield land in Te Puke and future urban Stage 3 land in Omokoroa. It is this Stage 3 area which unlocks over 2,600 new homes and associated roading and infrastructure networks. Critically, the plan change is a necessary deliverable to fund these much needed and long signalled infrastructure projects, namely the State Highway Omokoroa Road roundabout. It is staff's intention that the additional information provided since Council's last meeting helps allay concerns and reconfirm the position we're in, particularly drawing attention to the risks and implications it holds. Further to this, it has been our intention to better reflect Council's preferred position in the recommendation, which sets out those matters which Council may wish to reject. I appreciate there may still be some questions, and we'd be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Okay, so I think what I'd like to do is we'll open it for questions. We'll have questions about, of a general nature perhaps, and then we'll go through the recommendations with recommendations rejected and alternative recommendations and so on, and trying to get a level of comfort on that. And when we've gone through that, we'll take a vote on that as a package. Okay, that's my yes. But we can work through it and try and get some comfort and a bit of consensus around the room on this. Okay, I don't want to have a whole series of votes that it will make things very messy indeed. Okay, so open to sort of broader questions at this point. So I see Councillor Wickers.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. I really have appreciated the additional time to gain an understanding of this very complex situation. I just have a few questions. So in 2021, the MDRS became law through legislation. How does this relate to the decision that we're making today?
The MDRS was notified as a part of Plan Change 92 in August 2022. At that time, the 9 density standards took immediate legal effect. That is your 3 dwellings per site, your height, daylight, building coverage, outdoor living, landscaping, windows to street, all of those things. From that moment in time, if developers could meet all 9 standards, they could proceed as a permitted activity. If not, they needed a resource consent. Today, the decision you're making, potential decision you're making, is to approve the plan change, in which case those rules would then be made operative following a public notice.
So that, are you just saying that we're just we have to do this, because it was through the legislation said that we had to give effect to them? Yep. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yep. Okay. In the requirements, I had to look up like the notes to councils on this, and it says that it required Tier 1 territorial authorities in Greater Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, Wellington and Christchurch to incorporate the MDRS to the relevant residential zones. So the question there is, it's related to the specific area listed. So why is Te Puke and the Mokoroa included?
Because the RMA says that the relevant residential zones are urban environments that had populations of 5,000 or more people at the 2018 census.
And so that in our district, those are the two that apply.
That is correct.
Cool.
I think it's worth clarifying for Mokoroa, it's intended to grow above 5,000. It's not just what it is at that moment. Would that be correct?
Yes, and intended to grow to 10,000 or more.
Okay, thank you.
And so I think you sort of have answered this question in your opening introduction there. So this legislation has enabled intensification to go ahead in existing residential areas from the time the legislation became in force.
Not from the time the legislation was enforced, but the time we reacted to it and notified Plan Change 92 in August 2022.
Thank you. And last one, does this plan change give council better control over intensified developments? And if so, in what ways?
Yes, it does, because at the moment in those areas you've got non-complying activity status. So someone comes forward with that, there's a lot of uncertainty for developers, there's a lot of uncertainty for council as well, because the rules in the future urban zone are essentially saying that a certain number of things are permitted, 1 dwelling per house, carrying on with your farming, some subdivision of 4 hectare lots and things like that. But beyond that, there are no rules. It wasn't anticipated that there'd be those large developments applied for in those areas. So what Plan Change 92 does, it brings in more certainty, it brings in urban design controls. You're looking at controls over enabling different types of housing, your terrace housing, your duplexes, a better interface between private and public areas, better connections from developments through the developments to reserves, to walkways, to the town centre. There's requirements around outdoor living and being orientated towards the sun. There's requirements around increasing privacy for people using those areas. So there's a lot of new rules that give us a lot more control over better urban design outcomes. Also allows us to be more clear with people around what their financial contributions are going to be and clear around how many dwellings per hectare and other things we would expect.
Thank you.
Councillor Coxhead.
And that last question was actually my first question. Thank you. Yes, you've definitely done a lot of work and thank you for that. So my concern, and I know, again, we've had no control over this has come from central government, but my concern has always been the other part of Omokoroa that's already established and the potential for the MDRS housing to go in next door to, next door to whoever. Is there any indication, or is there any way we could only apply Plan Change 92 to stage 3 development? And is there any indication from government that there might be some leeway with this?
There's no practical way at the moment for it to only apply to stage 3. The risks are too high around how it's legally interpreted. So the relevant residential zones is very much the point. It means it does actually apply to the entire Mokoroa residential area. government has signalled that MDRS may be optional in urban areas in time. And until we see that policy, we'll know how that would actually be implemented. But at the moment, legally, there's a significant risk and perhaps inability, you could argue, to actually only apply it to stage 3.
So assuming government does come out with, let's assume this goes through today, and then government comes out and says, well, we will reconsider existing, how long would that take to pull up the stops on that, normally, in your experience, if there's a change like that?
We were certainly on an abbreviated process this time round with what government required us to do. They were quite keen for this to turn around in less than a year for us to notify, and then a year to make a decision. We're just over that. We've taken extra time, and we've sought that extra time to try and work these issues out. So a plan change can take around 2 years.
2 years, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Murray Benj.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to go back a little. When we approved the infrastructure fund for Prol Road, was Kāinga Ora at any stage involved in that decision? What requirements, in other words, sir, what requirements came with that funding for Prol Road that we as councillors did not know about? Could someone please explain?
Rachel.
Through you, Your Worship. I think the first thing to clarify, Councillor Murray Benj, is that this council was completely aware of our application to the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund and the fundamental premise, government premise behind that fund, which was to enable infrastructure primarily or even wholly for the purpose of unlocking land for housing. That is why the fund is actually administered by Kāinga Ora, because the premise of the fund was unlocking housing.
Was it locking housing for the developers or for Kāinga Ora?
Well, if you look at stage 3 of Omokoroa, which is what we secured the funding for, that is developer-led housing.
Can't quite get my head around how on earth Kāinga Ora came to be funding the roundabout. Can you please give me the reasons why they then stepped into the roading issue?
It's a long story, and I'm hoping Gary can make it succinct. But Gary, please explain that one.
Good afternoon. So essentially, Kāinga Ora was, wanted to free up housing nationally, and the government provided some additional funding for them to fund infrastructure. So as Rachel said, key thing was they were a conduit for a national bid process where they had $1 billion to allocate for infrastructure to free up housing, because they could see that the cost of putting infrastructure in was one of the barriers to housing and affordable housing. So we applied to that fund and probably got one of the bigger allocations from that. Thank you.
I'll just add to that, Councillor Murray Benj, is that Kāinga Ora were very definitively going to object to the additional housing going into the area unless the roundabout issue or that intersection was resolved, and they didn't have the funding themselves to apply to the roundabout at that stage.
The fact that we didn't have a government approving State Highway 2 second stage, and we do now, that roundabout, of course, would be very much part of stage 2 under the new government, would it not?
No, so TNL stage 2 has a full interchange at Omokoroa Road, where this roundabout is clearly defined as an interim roundabout that was deemed to have a 10 to maybe 15-year life. And it was to provide the interim safety and capacity improvements required to unlock the housing as part of the project. TNL Stage 2 is probably, depending if it gets funded through the GPS, which is in draft, is maybe within the 10 years. Practically speaking, even if it was approved now, you've got 2 years of designation land acquisition at least, finalising design, consenting, and then probably a 4-year construction program. So minimum is probably 6 to 7 years from now as to when it would be enabled.
Could I also ask you, Gary, then with the roundabout, it could be funded on a different source now that we've got a change of government?
Unless it's specifically provided in the GPS, then the answer is probably no. At the moment, Kotahi are providing $5 million towards the roundabout. So the interim roundabout cost sits at around 10 million, plus with this whole of enabling works on top of that. A large part of the funding is actually for council infrastructure that we will own in the future, from Francis Road through to Proll Road, and that's from a council perspective where you get a financial benefit from this IAF funding. But the interim roundabout, I doubt, would be funded through Kotahi.
Can you please tell me what were the conditions that Kāinga Ora demanded from us in order to fund the roundabout?
I think we'd term that a negotiation rather than a demand, but Gary, perhaps you'd like to clarify.
Yeah, it was a negotiation, but it was about, remember the premise of the application was about enabling housing. And so the application put together the work that the council had been doing since 2002 with smart growth, with the unlocking of the Aomakarau stages 1 and 2, and the plans for stage 3, and it said we've got another 2,500 houses to go in there. One of the constraints for continuing that development was the intersection with the highway. The council knew that TNL2 was not funded, and we had no certainty about timeframe, and the council said, do your best to get something in place even if it's interim in order to unlock the housing and enable Aomakarau to continue to grow.
With your experience, Tier 1, which we have been said we are, because we're a suburb according to the commissioners of Tauranga, and this applies to Te Puke as well. With a provincial centres like we've got, would you normally expect that houses would be built with garages or carports in order for people to have some flexibility in their lives?
There sits in with the rules that were in the plan change, but if I looked at Kaimai Views as an example, they were built with garages. They were built with 2 and 3 bedroom, and they also met the affordability criteria that this council set. So in terms of what has happened in Aomakarau, I think the track record shows that it works, that affordable housing and general housing can be provided, and it's a viable operation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Gary. So my questions are along the similar lines, and it's just a level of not being comfortable as we've gone over the last few meetings about this. And I understand when you're entering into a relationship with whomever, you have a contract, and the contract has certain conditions. But what we found out, what we have discovered is the conditions were, well, a lot more stringent and arduous if we changed our mind or changed something, and that's I think has been a shock to all of us. So in saying that, am I right in assuming that what has been entered into with the contract is something more than what we've, you know, hearing this today, I didn't realise that Kāinga Ora have actually enabled us by giving, and that's great. And I remember the conversation about that was good. And it's very sad that they have to do that the government actually aren't doing that. But anyway, my question is about what what the level of uncomfortability that I felt when we talked about if we pulled out, what it would mean to us.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that this council, in the previous term, lobbied extremely hard to get that funding for the roundabout. The safety of residents exiting Aomokara was a critical thing that our council wanted to solve. There were people dying on a regular basis, and it was just unacceptable. So we lobbied extremely hard.
That's not what I'm talking about. It's talking about what we were told the other day when we looked like we weren't going to pass this, and we were saying that we were going to be in, I can't remember what, losing money, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's what it was. Loss of reputation.
John, did you want to?
I think maybe we weren't all aware of all the detail of the funding contract. But if you step back from that, I think it's incredibly reasonable for an organisation, if they are giving you funding to progress a particular outcome, that it would be a condition of that funding agreement that if you didn't achieve that outcome, that they would no longer fund. And that's all they've said.
Okay. Yeah. It would to understand that a bit more. The other.
Are there any further general questions? Councillor Coxhead, and I've got Councillor Joyce then.
So the funds available from Kāinga Ora are 46.8 million, thereabouts, correct? And
38.
it's 46 in here.
But the total funding package, including our own contribution, both in terms of land and dollars, as well as Waka Kotahi, it's a total funding package of 46 million,
Right,
just over.
thank you. So, and we're saying it's around about 10 million dollars? No? That's what I just heard?
Yeah.
So what we've got, and we've got the sort of current preliminary estimates, but there's several components that make up the package, if you like. So one is the physical cost of HEBS building the first roundabout on the state highway and the 4-laning through to what will be Francis Road.
Yeah.
That's around the $11 million. Yeah, the second component is from the Francis Road 4-laning through to Prol Road, and that's about 12. You then have professional fees probably sitting at 3 to 4. You've got some more land acquisition. There's probably $3 or $4 million of services relocation. So there's a lot of work being done with particularly power and undergrounding power there. There's the potential for park and ride, which we're just looking at screen part of it. So all up, the package is sitting just under the allocated funds.
Okay, so the allocation of the entire fund at this stage isn't necessarily all in place because investigating certain properties, investigating park and ride still.
These, the project is complex, and we're looking at, again, as we normally do, is how do we maximise value. So part of our process is looking at how we maximise value. There are components that aren't fully committed yet. So, for example, there's still some Wakatahi land that we're working through for Youngstown Road to improve that intersection and to improve the access to those properties. We've got a couple of other small pieces of land we're acquiring, but they're not fatal flaws in terms of proceeding with the project. The big part is the design for the State Highway 2 intersection for the interim roundabout is approved. The design right through to Prol Road is approved, so we all tick that off. We're now in the next phase of the enabling works and then straight into construction.
Okay. Councillor Joyce and then Councillor Murray Benjamin.
It's actually a very quick question. I just wanted to check, is this the first time we've put council workshop notes on the agenda?
I think it could be. I wouldn't want to be
Congratulations, 'cause
definitive.
That's a good step towards openness, and I look forward to more of the same.
That's a different discussion, Councillor Joyce, but I hear what you say. Thank you. Okay, so Councillor Murray Benj, yes.
Can you tell me, please, what is the difficulty with PowerCo regarding the intersection?
So at the moment, the power line's overhead, and as part of the intersection works, some of the poles are in the way. So their lines are either going to be relocated overhead or go underground. So they're in that design phase as to which of the options they're going to choose. We're also, as part of the project, agreeing to sell them some land for their new substation for Mokoroa, because they need a new substation for Mokoroa. We need that for the power to service the future development. And therefore, the project potentially will also include multiple ducting to put in future cabling for PowerCo. That may vary slightly depending on the timing of the TNL Stage 2, but the temporary relocation has to be done, and that's probably sitting at around $2 million.
I think the detail around the roundabout might be better discussed at a projects and monitoring committee meeting rather than a plan change decision making. But if you've got
It's
a
relevant,
desperate,
it's relevant, Sue. Can you tell me the timeline for that PowerCo work? How long is that expected to take?
The plan is that they'll finish all the design work within the next 3 months, and then the idea is they'll start doing their undergrounding that ties in also with the earthworks on the corner of Omokoroa Road and State Highway 2.
The next question, Sue, is for Rachel. And Rachel, this 92 plan change is as relevant for Te Puke as it is for Omokoroa. Have we ever done developments where we allow properties to be built with no garaging until now?
Councillor Murray-Benge, I'm not too sure that I am the right person to direct that question to in terms of the consenting environment in Te Puke. But what we have discussed before is that our local developers provide what they know the market wants. And what we have seen up until this point is that what sells are dwellings with a garage, even if it is modest, and some form of on-site parking. So that's about as best an answer I can give you today, because I'm not the consenting manager, but certainly we can't discount what might happen in the future, but at least for now, the market offerings across the Western Bay do continue to include, for the most part, garages.
Perhaps to Tony, could I ask you, in your experience, and you've been here as long as me, in your view, do you have any applications that do not require garages until 92 plan change?
Today I couldn't be certain if there's ever been an application without garages, but I align my thinking with what you just heard, that developers have always had the opportunity to use our rules and typically do provide garages. That is what they generally need to do, as was explained. You'd have to do a complete review of every consent to know what ones didn't have garages, and if they didn't, I'm sure there would be good reasons for that. The Plan Change 92 rules do not prevent people from having garages. They enable them. There are rules around a minimum building area for dwellings, which would still allow space for garages if people wanted to have garages.
sorry, I think Gary wanted to come in there.
I was just going to say the most recent example is at Kaimai Views, where Kaimai Terraces, I think Murray was going to say, has built terraced houses without garages.
And they're not selling?
Oh, no, some have sold.
Okay. Right, so Councillor Granger, was there anything else, or was that the point you were just going to make? Okay. Councillor Thwaites.
Before we debate or discuss the recommendations, I just want some clarification around bullet point B there, page 9, 10. Just a conflict, or not conflict, but there some terminology referred to that land as future urban, and then further down it refers to light industrial. So exactly what is the status of that land we're looking to
Councillor Thwaites, can we cover that when we get to that particular item. I think.
If you want
Yeah, I think
questions then, but I thought this was time for questions to tease it out before we do
I
that.
will have questions on each particular topic to gauge comfort on those or
Okay,
changes.
I'll show you
So we'll come back to
procedures.
that.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Well, any further general questions? Councillor Murray Benge.
Kaimai views, if community board members here will vouch for the fact that Kaimai views people are concerned that the road is too narrow, they've got parking garages and on the road, but they're quite sure they would not like to have anything slimmer than that. So why are they coming regularly to the community board if they are satisfied with the planning that we have done? Someone answer that for me, please, because it's relevant to this 92.
Just looking around, who'd be best to answer that one? Alison.
So I guess there's a couple of things at play here. There is, through you, Mr. Chair, so we have got a number of historic developments, and Kaimai Views is one of those, where there is car parking, there are garaging, and they are roads that were all approved through our development code requirements. In terms of the use of those properties, yes, there's probably a number of occupants have got vehicle requirements that are above what would be normally expected, and so they are parking on the road. And the width of the roads does mean that there is going to be some congestion. That is not unusual. It's not restricted to Kaimai Views. It's not restricted to any other part of our district. We do have a high reliance on vehicles currently based on our public transport, and I know you've brought that up before. You did raise a question earlier around car parking and garage requirements in Te Puke. So we have got, and I've just heard back from the team, we do have a number of developments that have been approved through our current district plan, which do have reduced car parking. So they are multi-units, and the car parking is not provided for all units. But there are also other provisions for on-street parking where there is reduced parking in the individual units themselves. So I guess it's what will happen is the market will determine what their needs are for car parking, and as Gary explained earlier, what tends to happen is that our developers are putting forward proposals for developments which do have car parking that reflects the current market. If the market changes, then we have got some flexibility that we do not have to require car parking on sites. Hope that answers your question.
Okay. Councillor Joyce.
So on topic this time, we already have at least one subdivision in Katikati where we are unable to provide full council services because we allowed a development that actually our recycling trucks can't safely get in and out of. Are we confident that if this goes through, that we will be able to ensure developments that allow things like recycling, fire engine access? You know, I know this was brought up in the hearing, but from the staff's sort of professional viewpoint, are we making sure we have proper access in the way that we didn't ensure we had proper access in the medium density development on the main road in Katikati?
Gary, you might be able to add to this, but I was just going to say that these are matters that are discussed through package of plan processes led out by my colleague Alison's team, and they are thoroughly examined as part of the engineering plan approval process. So our land development engineers work closely with developer engineers to ensure that particularly Fire and Emergency New Zealand and our refuse trucks are able to navigate the streets that we create.
Yeah, I'd probably just add is to navigate the streets, so the public roads, with sufficient turning for the 11-metre rigid truck. But where there are private ways or gated communities, then that's a different story because they can apply some different rules within their community which might not fit something like a rubbish truck going through and turning around.
Follow-up question, is that what happened in Karikari? So it's actually, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to move on to recommendations, Margaret, but I'll let you have another question.
With the section sizes that as small as they are, and there is no chance for anybody to have a garage, where are people supposed to park? Has there been any provision in this plan for parking for those great long list of sections that are so tiny, you couldn't park a car on them, even if they were empty?
If there are circumstances where properties are so small that they cannot include a garage or on-site parking, then it would generally fall to on-street parking.
But I'm not sure the premise is correct that these sections would be so small that they couldn't include on-street parking. Rachel.
Can I also add that stage 3 of Omokoro does contemplate a variety of densities, and in areas where we are contemplating the potential for 30 dwellings per hectare, there is the opportunity to think innovatively about more than one story rather than just single-story detached dwellings.
I mean, clearly, if you're going to have apartments, not everyone's going to have a garage. Otherwise, it just doesn't work, right? Councillor Granger. Oh, sorry, Councillor. Alison, did you want to add?
Yes, I think probably through you, Mr. Chair, I think, we're getting a little bit caught in terms of what is proposed here in terms of Plan Change 92 and car parking. So the National Policy Statement on Urban Development in 2020 removed minimum car parking from district plans from Tier 1, 2 and 3 territorial authorities, of which we are one. So in terms of the discussion that we're having today around minimum car parking, that is kind of a moot point because it is already specifically minimum car parking is not something that we have to put into our district plan. I note that you would, it's something that you desire, but we've already got a national statement that sort of says we don't have to have parking. In fact, it removed it.
Thank you, Alison. Councillor Granger.
Thank you. I'd just like to point out on this one that it is up to creative use of the land space for the developers. And I lived for a number of years in London in a development that had way in excess of our dwellings per hectare that we're talking about here. It was a very pleasant development. It was structured on a number of standalone buildings that were 3 stories high. They had studios, they had 1 beds, they had 2 beds. I think there may have been some 3-bed ones in there. They were spread around on the plot of land. There was adequate car parking. I was cheeky enough to park 2 and sometimes 3 cars when I bought this a classic. And it worked. So it's not for us to design the layouts of these pieces of land. And the developers are smart enough to react to the market, and I hope they're smart enough to have a look at some of the clever ways of doing it that are done overseas to provide decent housing with amenities that people want to live in.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henry.
Yes, but there is a moral issue too.
It's a question because we need to get to...
Well, surely we're not comparing eggs with eggs. What is written in there surely is not reflective of our climate, where we have people who are living on these skinny peninsulas down from the main highway with not adequate transport, and they have to use cars.
Okay, thank you. That wasn't really a question, so I think we'll move on to the recommendations. So what I want to do is, I'm assuming there's general comfort with recommendations 1 and 2, but move on to recommendation 3 and just discuss if there's general comfort with each of those alternative recommendations, A through to whichever one it is, C, D, C. So the first one, A, that's 3A, is around deleting the vibration standards. Okay. So perhaps Natalie or Tony would like to just explain what's proposed there, and then we'll gauge if there's a level of comfort that we're in the right spot, and then move on.
The vibration rules were something that were requested by KiwiRail for an area within 60 metres of the railway boundary corridor. Essentially, that would bring in a requirement for each individual landowner looking to build either a dwelling or accommodation or education, medical facility, anything sensitive to a vibration. They would need to engage a vibration expert. That would come at a cost of around $3,000 to $4,000. Another assessment about measuring rail noise in that area, which would take a lot of time, and again, there's a cost of that. I think it was $5,000 to $8,000. There may also be some specific solutions around designing and constructing a dwelling that would be $100,000 or more. That is something that you'll see in the table there. It's on the table to reject that in its entirety. That is to say, that's not in the district plan at the moment. Council staff never recommended to put it in the district plan. The panel has made a recommendation that you should. You can reject that on the basis of, I suppose, that there are some very onerous costs and constraints on landowners.
So I'd just like to ask if there's any discomfort with that alternative recommendation that removes, deletes those vibration standards. And I see that Councillor Granger's got a no?
I was just going to support it, sir.
Okay. Was there any discomfort with that? If not, we'll move on to the next item. Councillor Murray Bench.
I think it's important to note that the developers are saying to us that you expect when you buy beside railway line that the distance back is important, and you've covered that. But the other additional requirements that the panel thought was such a good idea, but didn't speak to the developers about it, would cost another $100,000 on to the cost of that house. And so I'm delighted that, in fact, the recommendation is that we not accept the panel's decision.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Murray Bench. I was looking for discomfort rather than speeches in agreement, so I think we'll move on with that for now. So B is the rezoning.
Be working from. I've got recommendations on page.
Keep going.
What we haven't removed the first or the second one.
No, we're going to do it together.
We're just going through it.
Do them all at the end. They're right here.
Okay, so 3B, maybe I'll just ask Natalie or Tony to introduce those and the rationale there.
This item relates to the land west of the existing Francis Road intersection with the State Highway. Plan Change 92 proposed for this land to become industrial, to provide for that industrial demand for the western part of the district and to provide employment. There's another area of land that was industrial that is no longer available for use because of a special housing development. It's further north of stage 3. The panel has recommended that that goes back to future urban. That's to answer your question earlier, Councillor Thwaites, that it's currently future urban. Plan Change 92 proposed industrial. The panel has recommended keeping it as future urban. The option you have on the table there is to reject that recommendation, in part to proceed with an industrial zoning, but as a compromise, tag it as being light industrial, as has been done on the eastern side of Omokoroa Road in that area. And with that, there are existing rules in the district plan for light industrial development. So that would no longer permit heavy industry. It would permit a range of other things like commercial services, takeaways, service stations, other lighter things. That is the option you have. And also, do we discuss at this point?
Yeah, so I think Councillor Granger is probably about to suggest something, so I'm going to let him do that.
Yes, I would like to move an amendment to point B. And if we look at the,
I think what we'll do, Councillor Granger, is rather than sort of moving amendments as such, we're more of a sort of drafting situation at the moment. We'll do it in an informal way so we can just get that free flow of talk so that everyone's in agreement rather than formal amendments at this point. Okay, so explain what you want.
yes, right. I would like to suggest that we think about a change to the wording on the top of page 11, where at the moment the words say industrial of the district plan with one exception as follows, and designates the exception. I would like to see a full stop after the word plan and all the rest of the words there struck out. Do I speak to why?
I think so. Just to summarise for councillors and anyone who may be watching, the effect of that is to remove the putting back in of cool stores into light industrial.
That's correct.
And I think staff had some wording as well, which I think mirrors or is similar to yours. So they may wish to explain that, or if there is indeed any difference to what you've suggested.
Just to be clear, sorry, that what you've just suggested for everyone in terms of what this means is that in the light industrial area you're considering, cool stores would be a non-compliant activity as opposed to permitted, which the report currently was referencing.
Does anyone have discomfort with that? Councillor Henley.
Just have clarification. So light industrial, and I read in here that there's an exception. And when we're saying we're not going to have that exception. Is that correct?
I think it's worth pointing out, and I picked this up last night as well, the wording that's in the agenda is extremely confusing.
Planning rules.
And Councillor Granger has suggested some wording that removes a lot of the complexity and makes it much more straightforward.
Can you answer my question?
So can you repeat the questions? Sorry, Councillor.
So just to be very clear, in my head, might be different thinking in the way Murray says it, that is only going to be industrial. There's going to be no exception for those 3 properties that were wanting to do that.
What it means is that the land would still be zoned industrial, still shows purple on the maps, you tag it as light industrial. All of the rules that are already in the district plan for light industrial would also apply to this new area. The exception we're talking about is specifically about cool stores. And what Councillor Granger is saying is that what you should actually do is use the existing light industrial rules in their entirety, not provide an exemption for cool stores, which would make them a permitted activity, and rather retain them as a non-compliant activity.
Are going to have cool stores there?
No. It is.
We're not going to have cool stores. That's all I want to know.
Okay. Councillor Joyce.
So I'm just trying to add to the confusion. Just trying to work out what you're seeking expressions of discomfort with. Are you seeking expressions of discomfort with Murray's proposal? Because I'm very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And I'm uncomfortable with what's there at the moment.
Yeah. So I think it's on the same page at the moment. So Councillor Cogshead.
So if it's light industrial, can a cool store, let's say, can they then apply for a resource consent and potentially still get that approved?
Yes, they can apply for a cool store or a pack house as a non-compliant activity, but that signals that it's an activity that's not anticipated or provided for in that zone. And you've got to step through objectives and policies and the management of effects to really prove your case that it should be granted.
So the only stronger classification would be prohibited, and that's very unusual to get that far. Councillor Murray Benj.
We have another area where, in fact, we made the past councils have made decisions and they weren't tight enough and have led to a great deal of anger and confusion in Te Puna right now. And so the tighter we can make this recommendation, the better. So I'm not quite sure with Murray's amendment whether that's going to be tight enough. Can it be commercial light industrial to actually extend it so that it's, gives a clear message that it's more commercial than it is industrial, even light industrial.
Rachel?
To your point, Councillor Murray-Benge, what the staff are saying is that we're looking to mirror exactly the light industrial provisions that exist on the eastern side of Omokoroa Road. Those rules have been developed after being tested through an environment court, through several mediation processes and ultimately an environment court process. So in that regard, we feel very comfortable that the outcome of that process and those rules being replicated on the western side of Omokoroa Road will be robust. I think in terms of the Te Puna Business Park, that is an entirely different set of circumstances there. So I'm not convinced that that's a apples with apples situation. I take your point though, but from a staff perspective, we feel confident, given the testing that those provisions have already had, that it will provide robust environmental outcomes on the other side of the road.
Through you, sir, to Rachel, we're not good at landscaping in our district when it comes to light industrial. And on that western side, eastern side, it's not well landscaped, which means it doesn't look that good from the road. Can we be assured that landscaping will be provided so that, in fact, it will look a little better and link in more with the 8 or 7 people who objected to this in the first place, and only 1 was in favour, but 7 objected. So how to make sure that residential and industrial can be complementary. And it can be done, but it needs a really strict landscaping requirement as well.
There are rules in the district plan that industrial zones need to meet with regard to screening themselves from adjoining roads and non-compatible zones. From memory, it's a 3 metre height screening and perhaps 2 metres depth. So there's a minimum requirement there that needs to be met.
Councillor Daly.
Tony, in terms of the height restriction and light industrial, this change that we're proposing effectively reduces the allowable height from 22 metres to 9 metres. Have we ever, 20 metres to 9 metres, sorry, but in terms of a non-complying resource consent application, has a breach of the height limit ever been proposed and accepted by council?
You're talking about the land east of Omokoroa Road where those rules have been in place for the last few years. I don't actually know whether there have been applications that have exceeded a 9 metre height, sorry.
No, sorry, west of Omokoroa Road, Francis Road.
The Francis Road area, if you're talking about a light industrial zone, that doesn't exist yet in that area. It's future urban.
No, I mean, if once we change this to light industrial, it'll have a new height limit of 9 metres. So if someone was to apply for a non-complying resource consent to build something higher than that, what would the chances of that succeeding be?
Yeah, you're correct. There is a possibility you can still exceed the height of 9 metres or propose to exceed the height of 9 metres for a non-compliant application. Same thing would apply. You'd look at your objectives and policies of the industrial zone and the management of effects, and then that is considered on a case-by-case basis by our consents team, and I couldn't tell you the outcome of what that
I
may
think
be.
it's a little unfair to ask our staff to comment on a hypothetical consent application about whether it might be approved, given certain breaches of this. No, I don't think that's a question that's able to be answered properly, or is appropriate to answer, frankly.
I guess, are we able to beef it up then, or is that not possible? Are we able to?
Well, as I said, non-complying is the highest level, apart from prohibited, and I don't think we would get anywhere near being able to do that. Councillor Granger.
I just want to comment on the, it's not a question, sir, it's a comment on the landscaping, and I just suggest that Councillor Murray Bench takes a drive past ITM on the way, take a drive past ITM on the way into Omokoroa. The landscaping is fabulous.
Okay, Councillor Henry?
Just going along with what Councillor Daly was saying and my previous concern about the cool stores going into there, but under light industrial, there'll be a whole lot of other regulations that aren't in industrial with the noise level and stuff like that, so you won't be having people going with those big buzzing machines going all day, all night. That would prohibit that sort of thing, wouldn't it?
There are noise rules in Section 4C amenity that apply to industrial activities which seek to keep industrial noise down to a level that is acceptable when received from a neighbouring zone or neighbouring dwelling. Through that Environment Court decision that Davey was just talking about, those rules were made a little bit stricter in the light industrial zone. They lowered the L-max, you know, that single loud banging sound that's measured. That has to be less. They also brought more stricter rules on onto Saturdays, which normally wouldn't be the case.
Okay, so I'm sensing there's no discomfort with where we are there. The wording that Murray has suggested deletes the wording after plan in the first line of page 11. You have a different idea?
I just had one last
Councillor Daly?
question, if I could.
Please, go on.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, just to clarify, no development would be allowable on Francis Road until the intersection with State Highway 2 is terminated. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a rule that has been recommended by the panel in Section 12 that will say, despite any industrial zoning of that land at Francis Road, no industrial development or subdivision can occur until Francis Road intersection is closed.
And would access be via this 4-lane road from Francis to Prole? Or would there be another connection to Omokoroa Road?
There would eventually be a connection into Omokoroa Road. There'll be a link road from Omokoroa Road over to the existing Francis Road that would provide for access.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm not sensing discomfort with that 3B. So I'll move on to C, which is the proposed natural open space zone. So perhaps Tony, you can, or Natalie, you can introduce this one.
This relates specifically to the Brunning land, which is east of Omokoroa Road and adjoining the state highway. The current situation in the district plan is that land is future urban. Through Plan Change 92, we propose to add a natural open space zone along that frontage with the state highway. That has changed a few times through the course of the submissions and hearings, but ultimately staff's recommendation was initially that land is suited for natural open space because if you look at it, it's a low-lying wet area. The panel did, however, consider an alternative recommendation from council staff, which was taking into account that Waka Kotahi have a designation over that land for state highway. We know that there is an application to expand that designation, which is coming, which the plans we've seen would significantly increase the footprint of that designation into that land, including over this area subject to the natural open space. The panel accepted that option and have recommended that instead of rezoning the land to natural open space, you could leave it as future urban, wait for Waka Kotahi to go through the designation process, wait to see where that extent would be, and then reconsider what zoning you would like to have once that is in place.
So is there comfort with the alternative recommendation as in the agenda? Councillor Joyce.
I fully understand the need to protect natural open space, but I am concerned to know whether Waka Kotahi is happy with that because we will, you know, they're going to put a motorway through there. So there's no point putting a roadblock to that because it's now a road of national significance. And, you know, all we're really, if we cut across that right now, unless we really need to, we're just buying a fight that could be expensive. So I'd like to know what the impact of this, as far as we can tell, which is, I realise, a limitation, what would be the impact of doing this on the interchange plans and the road of national significance, which is heading our way fast, hopefully.
Thank you, councillor. Would you like to answer that one?
Waka Kotahi did make a submission at the time, which was that they were concerned that that zoning would affect their ability to deliver an interchange. They didn't proceed with that point in hearings. They focused on the roundabout issue and they didn't proceed with the other points. They didn't necessarily make a statement as to whether they were no longer proceeding with that or not, but they certainly didn't mention it much more. Sorry, could I just go back a step to what I said before, just to be clear that although the panel's recommendation is for future urban, what is lying in front of you is a decision to actually proceed with natural open space instead, which I didn't say.
Exactly, which was staff's original proposal, I understand.
That was how it was notified.
As notified, yeah. And the understanding now is that, because I asked the same question prior to this, that it is understood that having it as natural open space won't hinder Waka Kotahi NZTA anymore.
So that's not what staff are saying. They're just saying it didn't get discussed. So I'm concerned that we will not, we'll be getting in the way of quite an important project for our community. And in that case, I'd probably prefer not changing this recommendation, because it just doesn't stop it being natural open space in future. It just means that we're kicking the can down the road while we find out actually what Waka Kotahi is going to be doing. Because, I mean, since the hearing, there's been a change in government, there's a change in GPS coming, there's a lot of change coming, and I'd be concerned that we cut across that without actually knowing the full facts.
If I go to Councillor Thwaites, I hear what you say. I would suggest that with the change of government and the very recent decision on making TNL2 a road of national significance, I suspect our decision on this is probably not going to hinder TNL2. But I know Councillor Thwaites wanted to.
Which is further to what Councillor Joyce raised, in that NZTA indicated last year that they were on track to actually have that designation in place, and it's their own not completing the process, which is now overlapped with the plan change. So my question to you is, if they had have been on their time, would this have been largely irrelevant if the zoning had been over the land, or because it would have removed it, wouldn't it, from consideration?
Despite whether Waka Kotahi have actually made the application or not, it would still been within their thinking that they were going to do that, and they would probably still have the same concerns about what Plan Change 92 was looking to rezone it as.
Okay, Councillor Cox said, sorry, I missed you earlier.
So can I just clarify, are we talking about the strip along the side of the road that's, we're talking about being rezoned, but the rest is future urban still?
We're talking about a very specific piece of land. Following all the discussions of the hearings, it's no longer across the entire frontage of the state highway. It's more now at the eastern end of the running property. That's the area of land which you could decide today either to accept what the panel is saying, which is keep it as future urban, or go to natural open space. The remainder of the land, further to the west, adjoining the highway, is recommended to be industrial, and there's already existing industrial on that land. The balance of the property would be rural residential housing, like lifestyle housing.
So we're proposing just to rezone the strip of land, the rest of it's remaining as recommended by the independent panel?
That's correct. The rural residential zoning and the industrial zoning will stay as recommended. What you're looking at is just that strip of land, which could be either natural open space or future urban.
How big a strip are we talking about? Just roughly, like.
I haven't measured it. I wondered if there was a map we could show.
I just don't know why we're really bothering with this, to be honest. Huh?
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Granger.
So my question is this largely an academic exercise that makes no practical difference to anything anyway?
Okay.
Well, that's the question. Does somebody want to answer?
Oh, if it's a question, maybe you can answer that, Natalie.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Is it largely an academic exercise which makes absolutely no difference to the final outcome of it being under a motorway anyway?
I'd say whatever decision you make today, you've got Waka Kotahi and you also have the Brunnings, and they have a different view on how they'll be affected from this. And without either of them being here, I don't know what else to comment on that, sorry.
And I think just to note, in bringing this to the independent hearings panel, there were points made or a recognition of some of the pros with an understanding of each of the positions for the Brunnings and for where council was landing with natural open space. So there was, there were aspects on both sides.
The panel did say the IHP is of the view of leaving the land as future urban in the context of a plan change of the whole of Makaurau Peninsula is not best practice in resource management planning. But they did anyway, so.
Councillor Henry.
Yeah, I'm a bit disappointed that we're actually having this conversation because when I came to council, the whole peninsula was to be considered to be through the waterways, the wetlands and running out to the sea and all around the margins was going to be protected green spaces where urban development, what ran off from them would run through and be filtered into the sea. So to see this be talked about, and the Brunnings have done marginally protected the waterways from their cows by fencing off the wetland, but of course the cows all wander along the coastline and that runs into it. So to now not be carrying on with that is rather disappointing if we have a plan change, not a plan change, it's future urban, because that's what I believed everything was to be, the open space where we would allow the...
No, Councillor Henry, this was always going to be the land where the intersection was, give or take. Okay, I know what you're saying about the natural gullies and the stormwater system, and that's a great initiative that is throughout the rest of the peninsula. But this is where the intersection is, kind of has to be basically. So I don't think there's any option but to.
You can still do things. There's enough land to actually do some wetland protection and some marginal planting.
Well, I think we've seen with
What Waka Kotahi are doing currently.
Exactly. So a lot of NZTA construction at the moment involves a lot of wetland restoration, either nearby or further away to compensate or offset. That's right. Yeah. Okay. So I'm sensing a little bit of discomfort with this one, but Councillor Murray-Benge.
Ask, please, with proposed natural open space zone for this Brunnings and Transport Agency piece of land that they'll need in the future, what hoops will we be requiring of the Brunnings to go through, any additional hoops in their negotiations with the Transport Agency? How they will change that to do those negotiations? Get my drift? It's easier for the negotiations to take place between Transport Agency and the Brunning property owners if we leave it as a proposed natural open space, or we have it as future urban.
The only thing I can say to that is you look at what the panel considered, and you heard Councillor Granger say that it's not necessarily best practice to leave it as future urban if it is natural open space, but they did take into account, I guess, in terms of assisting with negotiations between Waka Kotahi and the Brunnings, whether it was fair to rezone the land now or leave it as future urban. And I can't comment on which one either party would necessarily benefit from the most in negotiations at this point, sorry.
Sir, I'm confused. Future urban or natural open space. What loops does one have to go through in order to change that zoning?
Rachel?
Councillor Murray-Benge, I'm not too sure that that is an appropriate question to be directing to staff, because the recommendations, what was notified through this plan change, in the opinion of staff, represented best planning practice. Council won't be involved in a negotiation process as between Waka Kotahi and the landowner. So I don't think that that's a fair question to direct to staff.
And can I direct it to you?
Rachel is actually a staff member. Councillor Wickers?
Yeah, so I think in applying whatever zoning we put on there, we do the one that is right by us, which is if it's deemed to be as natural open space, then that is the correct thing.
Thank you, Councillor Wickers. Councillor Crawford, were you agreeing with that?
I endorse that too. Because, you know, the question I ask here, who's benefiting from this the most? You know, every time I read this and the owner of the property, there's a like, it's like the owners must will get more value if it's zoned future urban than its natural spaces. But I agree with Andy that, you know, we should do what we need to do as a council is the right thing to do, and not about whether somebody's going to get a better return on their property.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Scrimgeour.
Yes, so it seems to me that the conflict is between what's doing appropriate for the piece of land, as the last two speakers have said, as opposed to what's the recommendation of the panel. And given that this is likely to end up in Waka Kotahi ownership, we hope pretty soon for a motorway, then even though the panel recommendation is to change the zoning, I wonder if we're best to leave it alone, because it looks like we're putting our nose into something that's not really going to have any effect for us. Once there's a road been designated, built, whatever land left over can be dealt with in the appropriate manner then. That's how it seems to me, so I don't know whether others...
So you favour future urban, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm leaning that way because it looks, I accept that the best use of the land, I think, is open space. But it looks like we're digging into something that's really ahead of us to be interfering. It's almost like interfering in a process that's going on around us to change it at this point in time.
Thank you. Councillor Joyce.
Yeah, I'd concur really, because I think there are benefits in both. Yeah, we all want to protect natural open space. Drove past that land this morning. There was definitely a wetland there. I was in a truck, so I could look down and see it pretty clearly. But you know, unlike the light industrial one, which is a compromise, and you're finding a middle path, this is just, you know, the hearings panel's gone through this fairly extensively, and when you've got both sides have arguments that are quite true, I would tend to say, well, if we're not sure, we should just stick to what the panel says. They've actually sat down there for hours, and I know we've unpicked another one, but that's a compromise that seems to be working for people there. This one, it's very much a flick the light switch on or flick the light switch off kind of thing. And so I tend to leave that with the panel.
So what I'm going to do is leave that discussion there. When we come to move all the recommendations, if someone wants to move an amendment that changes that, then that would be they're more than welcome to do that, and we can vote on it properly. At the moment, we are suggesting open space. So if you want to change it back to future urban, then I'll look for a mover and seconder to amend that, okay? So that's the end of those amendments or recommendations for alternatives. There was one more which has been raised prior to this, which is around noise from the railway. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to put it up on the screen so that everyone can see that. Okay, so thank you. So this recommendation, or the alternative recommendation, is that well, tell you what, I'm going to let Tony explain it because he can do a far better job than I can on this one.
Okay, this relates to another Kiwi Rail submission, which is about having a 100-metre area in which railway noise needs to be addressed by people building dwellings, education facilities, accommodation facilities, those things I mentioned before. I guess one of the options would be to, what we looked at, rejecting that rule in its entirety, and found that it probably wasn't something that we would recommend to you, because we already know that there will be, to some extent, noise effects close to a railway. We know that the district plan already has a rule that acknowledges that seeks to put the onus on landowners to design their buildings to protect themselves from noise. We know in the hearing that it was agreed between council staff, Kāinga Ora and Kiwi Rail that there was a need for a new, better rule to make that clearer. And then there were lots and lots of changes made throughout the hearing process in response to expert evidence to improve that rule and make it work. Instead, what we see here is a move to reduce the area from 100 metres to 50 metres. And some of the reasoning there is we had some very good evidence from Kāinga Ora, who said that the 100-metre area seems excessive, perhaps over-conservative in other words. It doesn't take into account any modelling. It doesn't take into account that there might be differences in the train speeds, topography such as buildings, and land that may get in the way of that noise, and other things that may mitigate noise. And from looking at what they are saying, it looks at like the 100-metre area is excessive. And they did recommend some computer modelling, which would have been able to spatially define the actual areas that were going to be of concern. I think at this stage of the process, it's a little bit late to do that. But as an alternative, perhaps using the evidence to suggest a lesser area of 50 metres, which would mean that would only affect the buildings within the first 50 metres of the railway, and beyond that, there would be no requirement at all.
Okay, Councillor Joyce, Councillor Murray-Baines.
So how does this vary from what we do in the rest of the district? The 50 metres versus 100 metres, or what the other rules are? And also, I guess, with other, I mean, if we had a chance to have a look at it, what happens at other councils?
This rule that you're considering, 100 metres or 50 metres, would be specifically for Omokaro and Te Puke, and specifically for those medium density residential areas. This rule does not exist in other parts of the district. The rule that does exist at the moment for the rest of the district does mention that requirement for people to design their buildings to protect themselves from noise, but through the hearing process it was deemed to be ambiguous, that it didn't provide any area at all, and was over to staff discretion to decide when it was needed or not, which is generally not a good idea for a permitted activity that needs to be certain.
Second part, do you know any idea what other councils do? Are they doing something similar, or are we breaking new soundscapes with this?
Based on what we saw, we did have a look. I know we're not talking about vibration, but there are other councils who have some vibration rules, and I would assume that would mean that there would also be councils that have noise rules, as they probably would have come through in similar processes, but I don't know exactly what those rules or distances would be.
Okay, Councillor Murray-Baines.
One of the great frustrations for the developers, they've told me that the panel talked to railways but didn't talk to them and didn't ask them their advice at any stage. In Omokaro, don't know whether you were here at the time, they wanted to put an interchange through, and people were really angry about it, and that's why it's at Epita for the changing rails. So for this area, 50 or 60, I thought the original was 60 metres back. Why have you come down to 50?
Sorry, we were talking about vibration earlier in the meeting, which is 60 metres. We've moved on from vibration, although I might have confused it there for a moment. We're now talking about noise, and the panel is recommending a 100-metre noise area. What we're saying is that might be excessive, and in that case, bringing that down to 50 metres for noise. Vibration, as you've discussed earlier, the option is to reject that rule in its entirety.
Councillor Granger?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak in support of this. I think we are again doing what we talk about with the land in Francis Road, that we're aligning this with the rest of the things we do in the district plan, rather than having little cutouts for different areas. So I think it makes sense that this area is dealt with in the same way as other areas. And we are concerned about the cost of housing, and imposing more and more restrictions and costs on housing to out to 100 metres flies in the face of that. So I think this is a good compromise that we've got a chance of getting through with the Minister.
Thank you. So I'm not sensing any discomfort with this this alternative recommendation to change the setback area, we can call it that, to 50 metres rather than 100. Okay. So, sorry, Councillor Crawford.
Just, I did ask this when we worked on this about existing buildings applying for future alteration consents, that this rule will apply. So it's not just for new houses.
The recommended wording for this rule is all buildings and additions to those buildings.
Than just new subdivisions.
Okay. So with that, I think we're on to the pointy end, I guess. And I'd be looking for a mover and seconder for recommendations 1 to 7 that incorporate 3A, B, C, and this new D, the alternative recommendations within those. Okay?
Can we take them separately?
Yes, I guess we can. I think that's, yeah, sure, go on. Yeah. Sorry, hang on. You mean the 3A, B, C, D, or every single resolution? Hmm? So you're suggesting, sorry, I'll just find it. You want to move recommendations 1, 2, and 3? You want to do it separately? Okay.
Just do 1 and 2 together.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I think we better do 1 and 2 together. I would hope there's not much disagreement on that one. So can someone move recommendation 1 and 2, please? Councillor Granger, seconded Councillor Joyce. If there's no discussion.
As we're changing the character of Omokoroa markedly, I just question the low significance. And I think it should be a high significance because it's, we've never had this before. Never had this before. And so for the people of Omokoroa to be living with this, with the character changing, I think it's of high significance, sir. And I'd like to move that we move it to high significance.
Rachel, would you like to respond to that? Because there's a staff recommendation about the following the significance engagement policy.
Yes, I would like to respond to that, and noting that this matter did get some debate when the substantive matter was first on the table. Having reflected on the debate that emerged last time round, I can advise that Council does not have the jurisdiction to change the significance assessment, most notably because the only ability that you've got is to accept or reject the recommendations put forward by the Independent Hearings Panel for ultimate determination by the Minister. You do not have jurisdiction to go out and consult on this, and by implication changing your significance assessment to high would imply that some form of additional community engagement would be required. All of that community engagement has been done through the intensification planning instrument process that this is. It has been thoroughly and openly enabled public submissions, including as Natalie mentioned, a week-long hearing process that enabled submissions and further submissions. So in that regard, council does not have the jurisdiction this afternoon to change that significance assessment.
Okay, sounds pretty comprehensive. So, it's moved Councillor Granger and it was seconded Councillor Joyce. So I didn't think it was going to get complicated. So if there's no further debate, I should put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. So moving on to recommendation, so let's read it one at a time. 3, sorry, Margaret, Councillor Murray Bench, did you want all of them separately, or are you happy to take the rest together? Okay. So we're looking at recommendations 3 to 7. So I'll move that and look for a seconder from the room. Councillor Henry. Thank you. And just foreshadowing or mentioning what I said before, if anyone did want to change 3.
So can I ask a
3C?
question? When you're moving that, that's with the change to the light industrial incorporated.
So yes, so I'll just run through that.
Really clear, please.
So 3A is about removing the railway vibration issue. B is Francis Load light industrial, but no cool stores. C is natural open space, and D, which is up here on the screen, is the noise area going back to 50 metres. Okay.
So you've incorporated Murray's change, well, and staff change, but Murray brought it up. He gets the credit.
To do the full stop after district.
No, because I've moved it as it is. But I will, yeah. So I just will highlight which has reminded me. So the Francis Road light industrial, that removes that text after the word plan on that top line. Yeah. Okay. So I've moved that. That doesn't need an amendment unless someone wants to change it again. So I've moved it. Councillor Henry has seconded it. Is there any debate? Councillor Murray Bench.
So I think our staff have done a wonderful job in the work that they have done. But the character of a Mokoroa is going to change so drastically, and I think this is a heartbreaking decision that we're expected to make. Never, ever will we have such an important decision before us in the next 10 years, because this is a character-changing thing for the whole of Mokoroa. The social implications of having so many sections with no garages for them, and you can talk about public transport, but people aren't using public transport like we would like, and we would hem people in, and there may be a few sections in behind Kaimai Views where in fact you have no garages, but this is the whole of Mokoroa is going to be affected by this decision. And so I think it is creating an antisocial environment, and we have not got the supports in place to support the community as regards to that. We've talked about Auckland and Wellington and even Christchurch, where in the central cities of London and any other city that you can think of, where people live in apartments and they've got transport close by, public transport. But this is a Mokoroa, and they have not got the transport in place to support all these sections and subdivisions. And it's all very well for us to sit in comfortable accommodation and leave it to the market to determine whether these will sell or not, because Kāinga Ora will have control and they'll do exactly what they like. And that is not social housing as I expect to see, sir. So I cannot vote for it. I want it to go back to the minister so we can lie upon the table, so we can talk to the minister who's new, who says that the medium density rule need not apply. And we need to actually make sure that what we decide for Te Puke and Omokoroa, that we have the standard in place that people can actually live and work and play in an environment that is comfortable to them. This is not, we have done all the work because we had the independent commissioners doing the work, but Kāinga in the messing it up of these piddling little sections. And
So, Councillor Murray-Bench, I think we need to be a little bit careful about insulting Kāinga in that way.
Sir, I don't take it back. I don't take it back because they have not taken into account living in a provincial city, town as it will be, the need for public transport. Even if they'd put carports on, would have been a start, but they haven't. And so, sir, I can't support it, full stop. I want it to go back to the minister, lie on the table till we talk to him about what we should do now.
Okay,
But-
thank you, Councillor Murray-Bench. Councillor Granger.
Thank you, Your Worship. The decision that we are here to make today really should not come as a surprise to anyone. It was 9th of September 2002, that's nearly 22 years ago, that the Western Bay lodged a resource consent with Bay of Plenty Regional Council for a crossing rivers with a wastewater pipe from Omokoroa to Tauranga. 22 years ago. And newspaper articles from back then said the council was building a pipeline for 10,000 people and the current population was 2,000. And it wasn't all that long after that that the 10,000 became 12,000. So 22 years this has been in the making, at least. And I'm sure there was some planning that happened before the resource consent was actually lodged. And if you go on Google and say Omokoroa population 12,000, you get 7,950 hits. So it's not a secret. It's been out there for a long time. And in fact, when we were planning our relocation from London to here in 2012, I found this online, which is the Omokoroa Community Development Plan, which says that at the start, in this context, the peninsula's population is forecast to reach 6,050 in 2021 and 12,000 in 2036. So it's been out there for a long, long time. And the number was based on the wastewater pipeline capacity, and with improvements in technology, staff now tell us that can be 13,000 served by the investment that the council has already made in this pipeline many years ago. And we know that our region is desperately short of houses. We need to provide housing. In fact, it's one of the things that we as a council have set out to do in our plans of what we want to do is to deliver houses. So we need to provide more land for housing. So then the question is the housing density. And really it shouldn't come as a surprise that we cannot accommodate 13,000 people in Omokoroa on quarter acre Pavlova Paradise sections. Just cannot happen. There isn't the amount of space there. But in any case, regardless of all of that, we still have to, under the law, comply with the MPSUD, which has been around for years, and the new medium density standards, which came into force in 2022. Whether or not we believe they should apply in Omokoroa is a totally different story. And I don't think there's many of us around the table who do think they should apply. But the law says they have to, and we don't get a choice. It's come down from on high. So that, in a sense, is a moot point. We just, as a council, have to give effect to what we're told to do by central government. So I don't think Plan Change 92 introduces anything unexpected in terms of housing density. It's been well canvassed, well discussed with the population, and it's been known for, as I say, nearly 22 years. Then there was stormwater concerns raised, but again, they're not our bailiwick. That's been set upon us by the regional council. It's something we have to give effect to. traffic issues have been raised. We know that we're getting around about in 2025. TNL Stage 1 will open in 2027, which is going to take a huge amount of pressure off State Highway 2. And we know that historically, in Mokoroa, there's about 100 houses developed in a year. So from now to 2027, we may get another 300, perhaps 400 houses. So how significant is those extra 300 or 400 vehicles going to be on State Highway 2 when we know the average daily traffic count at the moment on the Wairoa Bridge is 23,874 a day? And obviously, we are incredibly frustrated that we've been let down by successive governments in the delivery of that road to Mokoroa. We were promised it by 2015. We haven't got it. We are where we are, and we can't change that. So what has come down from the independent hearings panel really is what we expected to happen. We were going down that road with the SSA or whatever it was before it got changed with the MDRS. And I think where we did have concerns was what the independent panel came up with, and we've canvassed those this afternoon, and we've said, no, we don't agree, and I think we've made wise decisions on those in terms of the alterations that we're going back to suggest. So on that score, sir, I should be voting for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. I now have Councillor Coxhead.
I feel very conflicted about this, and I feel like we've been placed between a rock and a hard place, to be honest. I want to make it clear that I want to see good housing, houses that people are proud to live in. I don't want to put this council in a position where we're breaching contracts. I want to see good roading. I would like to see a safe exchange between State Highway 2 and Aomokoroa Road. I want us to enable schools, both the primary and the secondary. And I understand the risks that are involved in this scenario if we didn't proceed with this, with largely government-imposed dictates, to be fair. And I realise that the MDRS was the first cab off the rank. It's already implemented in Aomokoroa, and the plan change 92 really does tighten up a lot of that as well. So I thank you, staff, for the time, extra time and effort you've put into clarifying a lot of our questions and a lot of our concerns and addressing those. But originally, when this we first had our meeting and this was laid on the table, I said I would like to hear from Kāinga Ora and also the minister in charge of this now under the new government. And I still stand by that. I feel like there is change in the wind. However, we don't have any real certainty, and we're sort of caught in this middle ground at the moment between what was the past and what could be the future. So I still have the same concerns. I still am concerned about the MDRS being implemented in the existing establishment in Aomokoroa Peninsula, and obviously Te Puke as well. Sorry, when I say Aomokoroa, I mean Te Puke as well. I still am concerned about the lack of public transport, and yet we're building the houses before we have the transport, so cart before the horse. The congestion on this road is on State Highway 2 currently is ridiculous, and I mean today myself and Councillor Thwaites had to go up to Aomokoroa and come back and then wait in traffic for a very long time to get back here again. So it's not going to get any better anytime soon. We've got a long way to wait before stage 2 of the Northern Link. I feel like we've got no clear government direction. We've got a few speeches, an announcement on the 28th February, but we've got no clear direction from this government of where we're heading. We've got implied actions. I would just fear that if the direction changed and we've implemented this, we may have cooked our own goose and the goose of those in Aomokoroa and Te Puke. So where I sit, I still want to hear from Kāinga Ora, and I still want to hear from the minister. So I too would like this to lay on the table again until we can get clarification particular to our own circumstances here in this district. So I am rejecting the motion. That's
Thank you, councillor Coxhead. Councillor Wickers.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey coming into this as a new councillor. Obviously, a lot had happened prior and no knowledge to that. So it's been a bit of a quick learning journey for me. While I hear the real concerns and the things that I don't like at all as well, but those concerns I feel are muddying the waters. Because in reality, we're responding to legislative change that we are directed to change our district plan to give effect to it. And this is to allow intensification in housing. This is, how much talk has been said over the years that we need more housing, and this is the way that central government has responded to that at the national level. This housing shortage, housing stuff is our strategic priority. It's one of the things that's right up there. And we've been told that, this type of intensification is happening without this plan change anyway. So we've been told that by putting the plan change into our district plan, we get better. We have the ability to have better outcomes. If we theoretically don't, it's worse. I acknowledge that Te Puke hasn't, the level of detail hasn't gone into there, but I also acknowledge that we're going through the spatial plan process as we speak, and that this will give an opportunity to Te Puke to address the growth there. So I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Wickers. Deputy Mayor Scrimgeour.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to say I want to support this. As Councillor Granger put it so eloquently, this shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody. The population statistics for Aotearoa have been talked about for a long time, and while this does allow for some increased degree of intensification, it's small in the scheme of things compared to what's been planned for a long, long time. I just wanted to comment on 2 points, perhaps. One is in regard to my comments earlier in regard to the change of zoning on the Brunning land. I just want to be clear that I actually support the panel's recommendations in the sense that I think that's the most appropriate use of the land. However, what I was trying to get across before is I do feel uncomfortable about the fact that it feels like we're changing the zoning when there's another process taking place in terms of acquisition of land to build a road. I'd rather keep my nose out of it. But on the other hand, I'm prepared to accept the recommendations of the panel. The other thing I wished to comment on was the project which Mr. Ellis gave us such a clear explanation around the roundabout at Aotearoa intersection there, and it's often talked about as if this big package of funding is for the roundabout. And so I think it was very good to have the breakdown from him of where the money goes, and probably 3/4 of that money is invested permanently. And there is a very good precedent for roundabout being built and disestablished in our own district not so very long ago, when there was a large new roundabout built at Domain Road at Papamoa, and there were all sorts of claims about how that was going to be integrated into the TEL when it was built. It was only in place for a very few short years before it was superseded by the construction of the TEL and the overpass and everything that was constructed there. So this is not something abnormal. It does seem, like a bit of a waste of money, but it's important we get that infrastructure in place to accommodate this continued development of what's been signalled for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Scrimgeour. Councillor Crawford.
Yeah, I too like to support this, and largely because the need is housing, and we have to be able to provide that. And here's the way that it can be. So for one who works in the community and see the desperate need for housing, it's huge. And as much as we might disagree with what it will look like and the way it's who looks after it, the landscape or whatever, we have to. To me, this is like going into the future. We're one of the fastest growing areas in New Zealand. And unfortunately, the way we do things, we always seem to be like the cart for the horse in the way of infrastructure. But we've got what we've got. We are growing and the need's desperate. I talk to people who are in that space helping to get people in housing, and it's just getting worse. And I saw the one guy this morning at the cafe who works in one of the Murray health providers was saying to me that we can do all the things of the services, but if they don't have a safe place to be in, then all the work they're doing is really amounting is just a band-aid, than a long-term solution. And the other thing too is that this is a cultural change for us. Again, for us who've lived overseas, like Murray, Councillor Ranger mentioned about how I know that there is public transport that helps to make high-density housing work over there, but it does work, and societies have been a lot longer and older than us have found a way forward to be able to accommodate their growing populations. And there's a lot for us to learn from that. And for us who are older, we grew up with the dream of having, your own house in your acre section and great retirement and all that kind of stuff and open spaces. But I think that we've got to put that aside and think about what the future of helping our people, be in houses is going to look like. And, look, in Dunlop Road and Te Puke, they've got a real mixture there. We've seen that developed. I've obviously got a section right next to it. And, they've done that. I don't know if the council agrees about, it was, the procedure, how they did it. But, I go in there often. I've got a son who lives in one of those houses. And, it's really tastefully done and looks really good. And they've got the mixture of off-road, no off-road, garages, no garages, but how they've contained that and they've landscaped it and provided play areas, cycleways, all that, and creating their own wetlands and dealing with stormwater. So, look, I think that there's innovative and great ways that we can do that. And just reading Chris Bishop's message the other day about growth, and that when we concentrate growth and we intensify, it actually grows our economy. It brings more people earning and more people spending in that concentrated area, and it's more productive and better for us, and surely we want that too. So for those reasons, and mainly because we need housing, I don't think it's going to be an easy answer, but we do, I think as governors need to put our own things aside and consider about what it will take culturally to, we're talking about our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren who are going to inherit our decisions, and so, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Henry.
Okay. So I'd like to thank the staff and assure them that we have every faith and that you are doing the best for us, councillors, and our district. And it can't have been a very easy job. I do think that, and I don't know whether there's anything you could have done about this, but if we had been carried on the journey just a little bit more than we have been, maybe we wouldn't have got to, myself, I wouldn't have been in this predicament where I'm finding it more challenging to make decisions over these last 2 weeks. So we all have been, we're basically within a rock and a hard place. We don't really have any choice in this matter. In regard to the housing issues that we've talked about, is that what's been applied across the whole of New Zealand in high density areas doesn't really fit for our what I said before, the isthmus going out into the little skinny narrow land with water and creeks running off it, off State Highway 2. That sort of housing density doesn't happen when you don't have the infrastructure to be able to support people getting to and from work. My biggest problem that I have is trust, and it's trust with central government. We're going in here believing that we're getting all these things and anything could happen. It could change. So I'm putting my faith and my hope in that it isn't going to change, and I'm doing that for our district. We have their welfare in our hands, and it's now in the hands of central government. So I don't know whether they're listening, maybe they are, but if they let us down again, I'm going to Wellington. It's not on for our area. We are the biggest port in New Zealand. What happens here affects every New Zealander in terms of costing of things going out and in. They really need to stick to their promises. End.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Councillor Joyce.
Today, we have to swallow a dead rat. It's just a question of which rodent we choose. It's a difficult choice that the government's made us take. It's not anything the council has done. This issue is full of risks, including one big new one that has only firmed up since we last considered this, and that is the fate of the roundabout being put right in front of us. Today, to me, our choice is pretty simple. Do we reject some pretty awful planning rules imposed by the government and which are not really tested in the scheme change hearings, but then put at risk around $40 million in much needed infrastructure funding for the roundabout and other parts? Or do we adopt these planning rules, which allow homeowners to go up to 11 metres high on their land, overshadow their neighbours in existing urban areas, and then hopefully, as Anne has pointed out, the other party will continue on their side of the contract and we get it. So we have to choose which rat to swallow. There are real risks on both sides. Neither of these options are particularly palatable. We've tried to find a better middle path of compromise. Can we do this just in the Greenfields area? No, apparently not. We're totally unsuccessful. And I think, like others, I thank the staff for all your work to try and find a way through this. Let's be really clear that the council, even before the government got involved, had its own plan for medium density housing, right? This was before my time on council. I can claim absolutely zero credit. But then the government, and with the then main opposition party involved, agreed on these new rules. And yes, we need more housing, including medium density housing. Yes, not everybody wants a quarter acre section. But that is not the point today. Absolutely, that is not the point today. It's not about more housing today. Because whatever happened, if this was just a town planning matter, either way, we would be getting more housing, right? And yes, we need more housing. There was no choice in this process when we started. And staff have explained to us, well, it wasn't really considered in the hearing whether this was a good idea because we had no choice. And I agree. Why would you waste time looking at something you have no control over? There's no point. Now the new government says we have a choice, but we don't really. It's a Clayton's choice, or for the younger ones in the room who don't know what Clayton's was, it's a fake choice. It was a horrible drink, that Clayton stuff. It really was. The deadline for this right now doesn't fit with the government's option of a 30-year housing plan, because that would take a lot of work. So we don't have that choice, really. It's bollocks. So what do? The biggest risk here in my mind is that very necessary roundabout. We need it. We need it for safety. We need it for crashes. Later on, we can do something about the town planning rules. So the rat I've chosen is to go with what's proposed in front of us today. I don't like it. I don't think they're good planning rules. Please don't talk about this being about more housing, because it's not. We would get the more housing anyway. As Murray pointed out, we put the pipe in 20 odd years ago. It's always been on the way. On a personal note, I used to live in Mokoroa when I first came back from overseas. And I bought a business in Karikari, and I turned right on that corner every morning during the morning rush hour. And every morning I wondered if somebody was going to land up in my windscreen. The driving behaviour I observed on that corner was highly risky and frankly appalling. On a daily basis, motorists put themselves at risk, and often their children in many cases, because you can see them in the cars, by turning right into a Makaroa in front of trucks, vans and other vehicles, right in front of our noses. If it all went wrong, it was going to land in our lap too. It is, and is seriously dangerous. I mean, I deal with courier drivers driving in from points further west. I actually had a courier driver say to me one day, "I'm really sorry if we broke all your stuff, Rodney, because somebody again pulled out in front of me and I had to slam the brakes on." Yeah, there's appalling driving behaviour on that intersection, and that's a reflection of the fact that it's obviously not up to spec these days. You know, too many cars, too busy, too many houses. We know all this. That's why we're in this process. In fact, you know, that's why I moved to Karikari, because, and I love Karikari, but don't get me wrong, but I moved basically because of that intersection. So the dead rat that I choose today is to try very hard to get that roundabout built. And let's hope not too much damage is done by these poor planning rules before we can get a chance to change them. You know, actually this district had a better plan than the government plan, you know, that staff had worked on for a long time. And I'm really sorry that we can't do that for our district. So I will be supporting the motion reluctantly.
Thank you, Councillor Joyce. Councillor Daly.
Yes, I'll also be speaking in support of the recommendations. I've been involved with council since 2010 as a community board member. And like others have said, Aomakarua intensification has always been on the agenda. The wastewater treatment pipe capacity was always the question about how far you go with it. Our staff addressed some of those capacity issues by fixing the infiltration issues that were had, so effectively made it more enabling. Like Rodney and John have said, the intersection at Aomakarua Road has been front and foremost to us as councillors. I think over the years, Mayor Webber was particularly vocal on the problems there and made many trips to Wellington, I believe, to advocate on behalf of a better intersection treatment. And I guess the interchange is the ultimate solution, but even though TNL2 has made the roads of national significance, who knows when that will be completed. So I think the interim roundabout does address those safety concerns in a timely manner, and as well as the dollars that are unlocked because of it, which ratepayers and would have to be picking up the bill for a lot of the work that we've already commenced. So I think it's important that we safeguard the funding for the roundabout. Stage 3 plan change was being formulated well before the MDRS, and we were told that wherever we landed up, those provisions would likely be applied in other urban centres across the district. So even though MDRS does maybe bring some of those changes forward a bit sooner than we might have expected in Te Puke, for example, in Te Puke and Old Aomakarua, I think it was coming anyway. I mean, we've heard from Tony that council was actually considering more permissive regulation in terms of daylighting and height, I believe. So the MDRS sort of tightened it up a little bit, if anything. Hopefully I'm correct in that. In terms of MDRS and 3x3, in terms of being able to build 2 extra houses on your property with no, as a permitted activity, I think we've heard that that is unlikely to happen. There's very few cases of that likely to happen. So the sort of developments that are cost effective for developers would actually require a resource consent approval have to go through a resource consent approval process, and staff has the opportunity to improve the outcomes for the neighbours, because that has been a concern in Te Puke in terms of the daylighting issues, although we didn't actually receive that many formal submissions against it. But we've just seen after the latest Kāinga Ora developments have started turning ground in Te Puke that people are getting a bit worked up now that they're seeing what it means for them. But once again, those are resource consent applications not permitted by the MDRS. The other point I'd like to make is that there are a lot of this sort of intense development occurring around the country, especially Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, I guess, and I think the developers are doing a pretty good job. They are meeting the market. They are addressing those concerns about car parking. And after staying in an Airbnb near the airport in Auckland a few weeks ago, in a block of, I don't know, about 25 houses on a section that used to have maybe 2 or 3 houses on it, I was actually pleasantly surprised by how pleasant it was. You know, it was, all the houses were occupied. Everyone had one car park at least, and even though it might have been a bit tight and the walkways were maybe a bit public, but overall I'd be quite happy living in a place like that, I think. So in terms of changes to the independent hearing panel and how we've addressed those, I thank the other councillors and the staff for putting proposals in place. I think the vibration in Te Puke due to the railways was going to be a bit crippling, and the cost to accommodate that development in those areas would have been excessive and probably ruled out a lot of development. So I think we've landed in the right place. In terms of the light industrial instead of full industrial, I'm glad that we ended up where we ended up there as well. We've heard from some of the submitters who are directly affected this morning, and they generally find our light industrial proposal generally more acceptable to them, and the further removal of the cool store provision, I think, serves us and them well as in this case as well. So yes, overall in favour, and like maybe the MDRS is a little bit scary, and we are going to get some kickback, but I think we've got to go there, and I support these recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. So I will give my right of reply, and then we'll put it to the vote. So I want to thank councillors for taking the time to fully understand the consequences of potentially attempting to reject Plan Change 92, as was being suggested at the last council meeting on 22nd of February. Staff made an excellent job of answering elected members' questions, and there have been a lot, and exploring what was possible within the constraints of the legal and regulatory framework, which is also worth noting is different from a normal plan change. Consequences like the inevitable loss of funding for the roundabout on State Highway 2, the loss of funding for already sunk costs that ratepayers would have to pick up, and the lack of actual choice around MDRS makes the choice more straightforward than it had seemed on the 22nd of February. I acknowledge that some people have been saying that, words around swallowing a dead rat or finding it difficult, but given the financial consequences and the lack of actual real choice, the decision before us is far more straightforward than it had seemed. As I said on the 22nd, this development is happening anyway. This plan change puts in place essential parameters to control that and lead to better development. The independent hearings panel has done a tremendous job, and it's right that we listen to what they recommended. during the hearings and listened to all the people who submitted. Nevertheless, I am comfortable with the proposed recommendations we have made to further improve the plan further. And that is our job to improve what they've, if we can, to improve what they came up with. And we've only had to make a very small number of minor-ish changes, which I think could make a real difference to the on the ground situation for a certain number of people. So with that, I'm obviously going to vote in favour. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Would you like division? Okay. So all those who voted in favour, please raise your hand. So that's 9. And those against? And that's 2. Which means no abstentions this time. So I will declare that carried. Thank you very much. And with that, I think we've had a good session this afternoon. And thank you all again. And I'll declare the meeting closed at